So here in Gunnison Valley, we pride ourselves in our ranching and mining heritage. We enjoy skiing down Mount Crested Butte, in rafting down the Gunnison and Slate rivers, hiking through the blazing sagebrush, camping by our beautiful alpine lakes, and in the protection of our open spaces. All of this use is made possible by the high proportion of our county that is public lands. Around 82% of our county is public land, with it being divided among various federal, state, local, and nonprofit organizations. Sorry. All of this, this also helps to fuel our economy, with it providing valuable grazing allotments that help our ranchers sustain the herds they need to sustain themselves and their families, as well as bringing in thousands of tourists to the valley every year that bring in millions of revenue dollars. Unfortunately, all of this use has led, both past and presently, has led to a lot of degradation and the need to restore our lands, halt the spread of invasive species, and to monitor the health of our landscape and our local species. But unfortunately, we've found that the arbitrary lines we draw throughout our valley don't really matter to our environment. It doesn't stop a creek from turning into a gully that spreads from public to private land, or halt cheatgrass from spreading across the boundary. This has led to an incredible opportunity within our valley for our local land management agencies and nonprofit groups to come together to try to restore our valley and hopefully leave it better for the future generations. And we all have had the chance to work with some of these various organizations. And I'd like to take a moment for us to introduce ourselves and kind of outline how the five of us are a perfect example of the interagency cooperation happening within the valley.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mia MacNeill, and I'm working with CPW on U.S. Forest Service land.
Hi, I'm Kathryn Benson, and I'm working with the Gunnison National Forest and collaborating with Rocky Mountain Biological Lab and the BLM.
I'm Garrett Konet. I'm working with the BLM management on BLM management land.
I'm Payten Maness. I'm also working with the Bureau of Land Management, partnering with the Western Colorado Conservation Corps and the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservation District, among the various others.
I'm Addie Mandeville, and I am working with High Country Conservation Advocates. I'm working with a number of different organizations, but partnering mostly with the Forest Service and BLM.
Hello, everyone. My project is comparing camera trap and GPS methods through fall migration of mule deer and elk. Dr. Madeline Vanderkirk is my mentor, and Kevin Becca from Colorado Parks and Wildlife is my community sponsor. He was very important for the project creation. When you hear the word migration, there's a multitude of species you might think of, as shown in this map. There's birds, there's butterflies, there's fish, there's whales. An important migrator here in the West are ungulates. Migration is an important adaptation that allows ungulates and other migrators to survive in a variety of locations by leaving one seasonal habitat for another to find the resources that they need. It's important to study migration to help ungulates and other migrators to survive and thrive in the modern world.
Would you mind just hold the mic a little closer to your?
Yeah, I can do that. All right. So in Wyoming, ungulate migration has been extensively studied by the Wyoming Migration Initiative. Here we can see pronghorn, mule deer, elk, and moose wander all over Wyoming before crossing into other states like Colorado. Information about how, when, and why species migrate helps us to manage species locally and appreciate the world around us. In addition, knowledge accumulated through research and on-the-ground management helps advocates write legislation to better protect species. In Wyoming, ungulate migration routes are blocked by the I-80, as you can see here. This means that individuals must find new routes or risk getting hit while they're crossing the road. And this is a really massive highway, so it's not just like one road, there's multiple lanes, and it's really dangerous. Research in Wyoming has helped support under and overpasses so that migrators can cross the road safely. Next slide. To study migration, researchers typically use GPS collars, as shown here. They follow individuals with these, and they also use aerial surveys to find herds. However, GPS collars are extremely expensive, and they require the researchers to find the herds, capture individuals, tranquilize them, and then attach a collar. And sometimes they can't get the collars back, and so then they just run around with collars for the rest of their life. This makes it impractical to deploy collars on all of the populations of migrators around the world. For my project, I'm investigating the possibility that we can use camera traps instead of GPS collars, like the one shown up here, by comparing the respective data. Specifically, I am going to compare GPS-generated utilization distribution maps, or UD for short, as shown here, to camera trap generated counts of individuals traveling along the study transects. These UD maps help researchers visualize how much an area or path is being used by individuals. The heavier the use, such as these really red areas, more important it is to protect that area for the migrators. If the GPS data and the camera trap data are similar, then it'll be the first step in improving camera trap usefulness to researchers around the world. I'm borrowing camera traps from Cold Harbor Institute, the Center for Public Lands, and from Colorado Parks and Wildlife for my project. My stakeholders include the land-based migratory species such as the mule deer and elk that I am studying, ranchers who help support wildlife, the public who are stewards of public lands, hunters, wildlife managers and researchers who can study migration in a new way, recreationists, and communities that benefit from ecotourism like Gunnison. Some potential challenges include the cameras not working or getting stolen, and being able to analyze the data and process the images on time before we have to graduate. Opportunities for my project include working with the public through volunteers, helping them put the camera traps up and take them back down, expanding local migration data, which is just really important for managing the herds around here, new research opportunities, because if this works, then we just need to keep going forward and showing that camera traps can be used for migration research, and then a new tool that will help managers to study wildlife. This tool may help expand our knowledge of migration, and which helps people protect and manage the study species. In particular, it would support the need for corridor protections and increase inclusion in the research community by lowering equipment costs. So you can imagine it's a very price difference for those types of equipment, because these have to last a really long time, the GPS collars. And let's see here. My anticipated deliverables include maps of the camera trap locations and the density of use by migrators, a thesis report on how the camera trap data compares to the GPS data, and camera trap images, which will be saved on the CPW photo warehouse. And that concludes my presentation. I'll pass it on to Kathryn with the Forest Service.
Hi, I'm Kathryn Benson again, and my project is to create a vegetation monitoring plan in Taylor Park for beaver-based restoration. Beaver wetlands mitigate drought and flooding by slowing, storing, and releasing water over the season and over drought years, and they sequester carbon, they reduce the severity of wildfires, and wetland vegetation communities create a diverse mosaic of habitat. Beaver dam analogs, as seen here, hopefully mimic the structure and the function of an actual beaver dam. This one is in Trail Creek and High Country Conservation Advocates, which you'll hear about later. And then this is just a plant that I found that's a very upland plant, Liltherastium. So the restoration being done in Taylor Park includes these beaver dam analogs and altering channels, widening them, putting in soil plugs, which kind of stop and spread the water as well, and planting woody species, aspen and willow. My sponsor for the Forest Service, Ashley Hom, estimated, I believe it was 56 years of restoration projects if beaver activity doesn't increase. So we are hoping to create some habitat for beavers. Next slide, please. So you saw in Shane's presentation, but Taylor Park is kind of northeast of Gunnison. So if you turn in Alma and go up Taylor Canyon, little red circle up there. This map is the map of the proposed restoration on the creeks in Taylor Park. It was created by Amanda Allenbach. So if you see her, make sure to compliment it. And I'll be starting with Red Mountain Creek and hopefully just getting as much done as I can there. This is a nice overview. I want to find that hiking trail of kind of a view of the whole, almost the whole park. So to begin with, I'll be collecting pre-restoration plant diversity data, so an inventory of all the species that I find in my plots for those areas where they're planning restoration, and hopefully reference data from areas where there's beaver activity. And this data will help to assess those restoration efforts, how successful they are in creating wetland habitat, assessing biodiversity, native biodiversity, and then there is a database called the National Wetland Plant List, which is Army Corps of Engineers, that rates species from obligate upland, so dry areas, to obligate wetland. So I'll put all my species data through that as well. Wetland plants are a big, next slide. Plants are a big part of how those wetlands attenuate the water just by holding it in their bodies and also by decreasing that erosion. And they are a big mechanism by which carbon is stored, in addition to the biodiversity and habitat that they create. I have some plans that may be the next student. This is a project that will be continuing for monitoring plant vigor or biomass, because that is a big part of both that water storage and carbon sequestration, a lot of the good things that happen. Additionally, there are some stakeholders that I did not know about until a couple of weeks ago. There's private landowners on some of the creeks where they're planning restoration, so including those stakeholders in the conversation will be really important in future sites. And my sponsor also mentioned including some undergraduates in biology or EMDS to do help with some of the monitoring on the established sites. And I am really excited to create this legacy project and to increase the base of knowledge for beaver-based restoration and analog beaver dams. And one of the people that helps with that is Addie with High Country Conservation Advocates. So I'll introduce her.
Hey everyone, I'm Addie. I'm working with High Country Conservation Advocates, or HICA. HICA is an environmental advocacy organization that formed in 1977 opposing mining on Mount Emmons in Crested Butte, which is also known as Red Lady. You can see that mountain here. They've developed a number of programs since then, and I'm working mostly with the stewardship program, implementing wetland and wet meadow restoration projects. Next slide. So the stewardship program formed in 2018 really wasn't completely developed until last year when an MEM student came in and started partnering with the BLM and Forest Service on implementing a lot of volunteer-driven projects on public lands around Gunnison County. So really my focus for my project is increasing volunteer capacity and diversity of volunteers and communicating the science behind why we're doing these projects and how it increases climate resiliency. As mentioned before, we're working with a lot of different organizations and entities around Gunnison County. One of the reasons why Gunnison County is amazing on public lands is because everyone just works together, collaborating. I mean, last project, we had Gunnison Valley mentors come out with us and had some middle school girls learn how to build a fence to protect an important riparian area. So a lot of my work is tabling, educating people about the work that we're doing, getting people to sign petitions for outstanding waters or in-stream flows or the GORP Act. Next slide. So a couple of my deliverables are developing a strategic plan for community engagement within the stewardship program. I'm also developing a beaver-based restoration, Gunnison beaver-based restoration website to help educate the public about the work that's being done with beaver-based restoration around Gunnison County. I'm creating an interactive map of some of the stewardship projects that have already been implemented and that we'll be implementing in the future. And a final report of all my work, kind of tying everything together. But I'm not going to go into the wetland, wet meadow restoration projects because Kathryn and Payten will do a really nice job of highlighting those. All right, next slide. And while I have everyone's attention, I'm just going to make a shameless plug to come out and volunteer with us. We're doing a number of different projects in August and September, and you get a free lunch. It's super fun. It's a great way to network and connect with land managers in Gunnison County. Yeah, and it is super fun. So come out and volunteer.
Hi, I'm Garrett Konet. I'm doing an adaptive cheatgrass management plan for Hartman Rocks and Signal Peak, which Hartman Rocks and Signal Peak are two recreation areas in Gunnison County managed by Bureau of Land Management. They're most known popular for their mountain bike trails, hiking, or at Gunnison you have all your campgrounds. Next slide, please. So the main target of my project is inventorying the cheatgrass at Hartman Rocks and Signal Peak. Cheatgrass has become an ever-growing issue in the West for its ability to kind of change fire regime since it dries out during like heavy fire months during the summer and is a quick spreading weed because it is labeled as a class C noxious weed. And in most disturbed sites, cheatgrass is one of the plants that are gonna start to emerge early on before any other native species can. So in doing this inventory, I am going through Hartman Rocks and Signal Peak right now and marking down on a GIS application called Field Maps of where there is cheatgrass along the trails, roads, and campgrounds, since we are mainly looking at the human vector right now of the spread of cheatgrass. And along with doing this inventory, I'm also making notes of possible restoration sites along each property that could have projects further on developed to help restore the natural habitat of the sagebrush, as well as developing a public education component to either place at the trailheads or to possibly do within Western or the mountain biking and visiting communities. Some of the stakeholders I identified for this project are obviously Bureau of Land Management, Western Colorado University, since Signal Peak is adjacent to Western, Gunnison County, and Gunnison County Trails, which for those of you that aren't familiar with cheatgrass, this is one of the plants I found, I want to say a week or two ago at Hartman Rocks. It's right behind one of the information kiosks. Next slide, please. And so for my deliverables, for this project is an updated inventory of where the cheatgrass is at Harmon Rocks and Sino Peak. And then based off of that inventory, to help schedule herbicide treatments for this cheatgrass and scheduled out restoration projects for either this year, the coming spring, or even possibly during the summer months. And as well as developing, like I said, an educational element to this, of possibly putting either posters at trailheads to inform visitors on cheatgrass, or even like a simple QR code to help them find more resources or volunteer events to help either manage cheatgrass or help in the restoration of these recreation areas. Next, Payten.
So for my project, I am implementing low-tech restoration methods for wet meadow restoration to improve Gunnison sage-grouse brood-rearing habitat. Next slide, please. So historically, Gunnison had a lot of wet areas. We had beavers in nearly all of our drainages. We were a major exporter of potatoes because it was so wet and fertile. But when white settlers came in, they would drive their wagons and then later their roads through these meadows because they're a lot easier to go through than the sagebrush. This created channelization within the meadows that lowered the water table and dried out these areas that then reduced the forage and the overall water of these areas. This is really critically important for the Gunnison sage-grouse. They are a federally threatened species with only about 3,000 of them left, with the majority of them here in the Gunnison Valley. The wet meadows are a critical brood-rearing habitat for them because their chicks need the higher insect and forbs that are found in these meadows to fatten up to survive our really harsh winters. And so like I mentioned, I am doing low-tech restoration. They're called Z-dike structures. The handbooks were written by Bill Z-dike out of New Mexico, but they are native Pueblo techniques with functioning structures having been found that date back to like the 1280 AD. And so some of the challenges that these pose is, while these are ancient techniques, they are relatively new to Western science. They've really only been implemented within the last 5 to 10 years. So there's not necessarily a lot of hard science around how these techniques improve the overall forage and water levels, as well as with the West being so dry, there are still some legal questions around water right issues. But the awesome things about these techniques is that they are low tech. We are going out and building structures out of local rock and logs. And I've taken a group of 10 completely untrained volunteers from the backcountry hunters and anglers up to the Signal Peak area, had 3-4 hours out with them and put in 10 structures. So it's really easy to implement them and make a great difference in a very short amount of time with very minimal tools and resources. Next slide. And so one of the cool things about this is that the Wet Meadow Working Group was formed in 2012 to bring Bill Z-dike into the valley to teach basically anyone that has anything to do with water in the valley. The Forest Service is involved, Upper Gunnison River Water Conservation District, CPW, StoreCorps. There are so many groups within the valley that are working on this work that I get to partner with. HICA as well is sponsoring our day up at Upper Willow Creek if y'all would like to come out and volunteer. But so some of my deliverables are going to be simply doing the work, going out to these areas and putting in the structures and managing the crews, as well as doing like volunteer outreach and educating them about the importance of this work. I'm also going to be doing some drone surveying that I'm hoping can set the stage for future MS and MEM students to do some time-lapse comparisons of how our restoration is physically impacting these areas. This is also a legacy project Max Sawyer up at the far corner of that picture graduated last year. I inherited the project for him, and we are hoping to continue the project with your cohort. So if anyone's interested, please come out and volunteer, talk to me. I'd love to get y'all involved. Yeah, and now we'd love to open up the room for any sort of questions.
I have a quick question for Garrett on your cheatgrass roadside application. Is that going to be multi-year application since most of the cheatgrass will last through first application?
So yes, well, your question is if it's going to be a multi-year herbicide treatments, which the answer to that is yes, since one thing I forgot to mention is that after me, the Bureau of Land Management is hoping that someone else would take on this project to kind of keep doing the inventorying just to see kind of like what areas still need treatments and how well those treatments have worked.
I also had a question for Garrett about the herbicide treatment. I was wondering if you could just kind of speak more on what research and understanding you have about the greater ecological implications of herbicide application for the wildlife, for the falling plants, and for the humans that recreate at Hartman Rocks and Signal Peak.
So the question was just my understanding of the herbicide treatments, basically overall with the ecosystem in Hartman Rocks and Signal Peak. So that it's a little bit of a loaded question, which it has been shown certain herbicides do affect the seed bank, which the ones that it would be using right now is Plateau, which doesn't have that great of effect on the native seed bank, but it still does to a certain capacity. That is something I'm still relatively learning about, since I'm a little more focused right now on finding the cheatgrass and just what possible like restoration projects to set up.
I have a question for Mia. For the camera trap data, do you know if there's how much like current data or if there is any being used to study migration of ungulates with camera traps? And then if so, are you planning on using that same like method for ID? Because I know that camera traps can have some difficulty with, you know, you have to train people how to ID the animals versus, you know, is it a mammal that they're actually seeing, or is it, you know, something else? What's your approach for that?
So the question was first, what other research is being done with camera traps on migration? So I found 2 different papers that were talking about it. And one, it was just kind of on the side, like, oh, we were also using camera traps. It wasn't really entirely relevant. But the other one, it was about caribou migrating through it was an elevational migration. So we're just like, oh, we're just going to put some camera traps randomly through this area at the bottom of the valley kind of thing. And they said it didn't really work kind of a thing, but the species was also really trying to hide from the wolves in the area, and there weren't very many. So that could also have impacted the findings, but this is a totally different area. There's a lot more of the species here, so that definitely will help. And then with the identifying species at the camera traps, so I am planning to recruit and then train some undergrad volunteers to help out with the camera trap identification. It really depends on how much time they have, how much they'll actually be doing. I did camera trap identification when I was an undergrad, so I feel okay-ish. I'll get a lot more practice, obviously, while I'm doing this, analyzing the images and everything, but I'm planning to reach out to my mentor when I was an undergrad and ask her what she thought was best with training us kind of thing. So hopefully it all works out, and that's part of the whole challenge thing. Like, if they can't figure it out, am I going to do the bulk of it and just have no time to finish? I really hope not, but we'll see how it goes. Yes.
I have a question for Kathryn. How are you monitoring the beaver populations to know that, or how do you plan on monitoring the beaver populations to know that your restoration is being successful?
I am not doing that. I am collaborating with another student in the MES program who is doing some habitat analysis. I don't know if she's planning, that's Amanda Allenbach. I don't know if she's planning on doing any population surveys or anything like that.
All right, well, let's give a round of applause.